I'm Chloe. I'm a
Chloe,
product
how's it
manager.
going?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited
Yeah,
to be
tell us
here.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a product manager for AWS AppConfig. I'll get into the details of what that is soon. I'm based in New York City, which is fun. And I've been at Amazon for over 3 years at this point. I actually remember when I joined, Control Tower was still really new. So it's just exciting to see how big it's blown up so quickly.
Yeah, and Jeff, surprise, more folks from the Control Tower alumni.
Yeah, that's not a problem whatsoever. So app config. Let's set the stage just like we did with Control Tower. Exactly what it is. What's the 101? What would you tell someone who's never heard of AWS app config before?
Yeah, so I will definitely spend a good amount of time just explaining app config and going through that in the demo, in addition to talking about what we launched yesterday. So just to set the stage. So basically at app config, we think that we are really changing the way that engineers can release software using something called feature flags and runtime configuration. Customers can change the way that their application behaves while running without needing to deploy new code. So I can tell you a little bit about feature flags, and then I'll talk about other types of dynamic configuration, and then I'll talk about our launch with Secrets Manager.
Gotcha.
Um,
I guess maybe a newer concept to folks that aren't hardcore developers. As DevOps became popular, we started using repositories so everyone can kind of contribute and we can have branches and we can track changes and everything. But feature flags is something kind of on top of that. It's not really part of the DevOps pipeline. It's more of like a different strategy for developing code. So yeah, let's hear more about feature flags.
Yeah, I think that, like you said it nicely. We like to think of feature flags as kind of a nice complement to some of the CI/CD pipelines that you have. But yeah, just to set this stage. So feature flags are basically a software development practice where you'll push your code to production, but that code and that functionality is actually hidden from your users with a feature flag. So no one can access that code or feature unless the flag is flipped to on. So let's say you have a really important launch coming up and there's a deadline before feature flags, you would need to get it all ready. And then that would have to be before the launch, but you would have to estimate the deployment time. And then right before launch, you would deploy, you'd go through the pipelines and you'd kind of just hope that everything went okay. But with feature flags, you can actually push all of that code out a week before, a day before the launch, but hide it all behind a feature flag. So then when the time of the launch comes around, you can just flip that feature flag on. So it's basically like a much easier, faster, and safer way to deploy your code. Um,
would that be similar to A/B testing? Like, is that
yeah,
okay?
that's
So I could
definitely a prominent use case for feature flags.
awesome. So I could just have like an application, like a web application, and then decide which section of the web application is going to be shared with the customer.
Yeah, I think that like that's definitely a use case that people like for feature flags. What I also think is just interesting about app config in general is that like there are so many other reasons why you would want to use feature flags, not just for A/B testing, but also if you're releasing something and you don't want to just have every single user like experiencing the feature all at once so quickly, you can gradually roll out your features and kind of measure the way that your new feature might impact the performance on your application. So, yeah, I guess like there's so many different use cases and possibilities. And I'll probably show you guys. I'll show you guys two in the demo, so you'll see them in action, which is cool.
Yeah, because I can imagine it would be maybe if you had 4 buttons and there was a new feature, a fifth button. You can have the code there for that button and it would just be like enabled false or whatever. And so AppConfig would be able to just go change that one variable to change that enabled to true, for example. And I know it, I'm at a really high level, but instead of pushing out that code, you could just change one variable, and then now all of a sudden it's enabled, and there's some conditions in the code to look for if that's enabled, and boom, a new button shows up without having to deploy something like that.
Totally. And your Boolean true false is actually like the most common and popular use case for feature flags. AppConfig also has like there are different attributes that you can use. So I'll show you an example where there's a number, and if you change that number, there will be a feature flag that will basically throttle the pagination on your page. So that's like an operational example. So yeah, I think that it's definitely very powerful, and there's a lot that you can do with feature flags, which is cool.
Sure. So there's a new feature. We want to talk about some new integrations with AppConfig. Do we want to talk about that now, or do we want to see the demo first? I'll leave it up to you, Chloe.
Yeah, I think so. What I'll do is I'll give kind of an introduction, and then in the demo, I'm going to show you both components. But before I talk about our integration with Secrets Manager and KMS, I also just want to introduce just the idea of dynamic configuration on a general level, because I feel like feature flags is definitely a really important workflow for AppConfig, but there are so many other different forms of configuration changes that you can deploy dynamically at runtime. So if you want to just think about so many of the small configuration changes that you could make without redeploying an entire stack of code, that could be adjusting numbers for service quota control, or the operational use case example like throttling. But because of that, AppConfig offers a lot of flexibility with how you can store that data as a configuration source. So we offer integrations with S3, parameter store, document store, and code pipeline. And then just yesterday, actually, we launched an integration with Secrets Manager and KMS. So now you can use Secrets Manager as a configuration source of your data. I don't know if people here are already familiar with Secrets Manager, but it's basically a service that lets you easily rotate, manage, and retrieve secrets. So that could be AWS credentials, encryption keys, database credentials, or just like any other password that you might have floating around. But basically, like this launch gives you a really comprehensive method to retrieve your configuration data via AppConfig. So it's kind of like this one-stop shop for your configuration data. I can give an example too that might be useful of like how this would be useful. So let's say you have an application that has two databases and two availability zones for disaster recovery purposes. And let's say your main database is in an availability zone that goes out, and you want to fail over to another one quickly and safely. So you can think about some of the configuration changes here that would need to take place. That could be the name of your availability zone, the database name, the database password, and so on. So in this example, there's clearly information that's secret, but also information that's not secret. What you can do with AppConfig is have your application communicate with just AppConfig to retrieve all of the configuration data that it needs. So this could be information from Secrets Manager, and then you could also have AppConfig retrieve, like you could have your application retrieving your configuration data from an AppConfig hosted configuration, which is one of the ways that you can store your configuration data. So again, like it is this one-stop shop for your configuration needs. There's kind of this aggregation of data that can be fetched by AppConfig. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Jeff?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're always taught that sometimes when you're developing, you just put a password into your code just to get it to work. So that is a no-no. So best practices, all of our customers, we should be second nature, but you do not put your passwords or your secrets in your code. So that's where Secrets Manager comes in, is where you can call and get those securely into your code. And now AppConfig has the ability to do that as well in part of these configuration changes within your application. So I can see where that'd be valuable.
And
Yeah,
Chloe,
I was.
oops,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask you just a basic question. Like this configuration data, is it JSON based? Like when we store it on
So
AppConfig?
yeah, that it can be, but you can also have like pretty much any data structure that you want. But JSON and YAML, I think, are the most common just approaches. And yeah, to your point, Jeff, I was actually thinking about that earlier today, that like having an integration with Secrets Manager, and there's also one with KMS that I can talk briefly about.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I think that it kind of highlights the need for our customers to have these standards and these practices to manage their secrets, that just like having more visibility into the importance of a service like Secrets Manager, because exposed credentials are the number one issue for bad actors. So it is super important. I feel like we always hear about stories just on the news of like cybersecurity and exposed credentials and hackers. So it is, yeah, it's important.
Yeah. So you mentioned KMS really quick. Let's just hit on that really quickly. KMS is AWS Key Management Service. It's the service to help you control your keys, or sometimes customers will bring their own keys, so that's where they could be stored. But KMS is the service that's going to handle all the keys for data encryption. And it sounds like AppConfig can now plug into that as needed. It sounds like you have an example, Chloe.
Yeah. So it's funny too, because you guys were just talking about all of these compliance frameworks and how like there are different rules and it's hard to keep track of those rules. But a lot of certain industry standards or compliance frameworks will mandate that you kind of manage your own encryption keys.
Yep. PCI, absolutely.
So now AppConfig supports KMS customer managed key encryption for your data. So you can basically add an additional layer of encryption with the self-managed keys that you create and manage. And I feel like another cool thing about KMS is just that it's one of those services you can't really avoid. Like it's all over AWS because it's integrated with over 100 services. So it's exciting that now AppConfig is on that list. And if you want to use your own keys and AppConfig, we have a good way to do that, which was also a really prominent feature request from our customers. So it's definitely going to be useful.
Yeah, when you hear the term BYOK, a lot of times that's bring your own keys, and some
That's
people
so
still
funny.
like why do you want to? Like KMS can do most of everything for you. If you need encryption for S3, you can let S3 handle the encryption for you. There are options for that, but because of exactly what you're talking about, some certain controls, you have to have your own keys. That key material has to be generated in a secure, on a server that's sitting in a safe that's only turned on like once or twice a year, that's in the guard shack, and that's where the key material is stored. We have to use that and nothing else for your keys, and that's where bringing your own keys, it's important for a lot of industries, especially PCI. So no, that's great. So Chloe, can we see this, kind of see how this works?
Yes, for sure. Okay, I have my, cool, you have the screen share on.
Yep,
so
we see it.
First, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through the AppConfig console, and I'm going to show you a good example of a feature flag solution with a sample website. And then I'll also show you the Secrets Manager integration and what that looks like in action. So
Perfect.
As you can see here, we're in the AppConfig console, and we're technically a feature of Systems Manager. So you can see that over here. And here you can see there are a lot of different applications. So an application with AppConfig is a namespace for organizing your feature flags or other configuration data. So The one that I'm going to be talking about is this one here. It's a fake vacation home rental website. So there are two different types of configuration profiles. There are freeform configuration profiles and the feature flag type. So the feature flag type can basically be thought of as a collection of flags. So I'll click on this collection here, and you can see that there are two different flags here. The first is called Show Carousel, and that's going to be a feature that we're going to introduce to our website that will basically allow you to see multiple photos of individual homes on the homepage. And then there's also one called pagination, which is that more operational flag I talked about earlier, where you can change the number of homes that are actually displayed on the homepage. But before I show you those, I just want to point out two key distinctions between these flags. So one is marked as short term and the other one isn't, which implies that it's a longer term flag. So at Amazon, we consider long-term flags to be ones that might be used again and again in the future. So in this case with pagination, you're going to see that there's a website with the feature flag that's going to throttle the number of results returned in pagination. So this could be used various times throughout the year, depending on the traffic on your website, what you want to highlight, basically whatever other factors that might just impact that decision. With short-term flags, we think of them as being used mainly for one-time feature releases. So after the launch, you would then want to clean up your flag and code to make sure that you don't just have random feature flags floating around your environment. So this practice of like noting what is short-term and long-term is really useful from an organizational perspective. Does that make sense?
It does. I think so. So, like you just need to turn it on, and then it can scale across all of the web applications or the resources that it's being sent to. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll show it to you because I think that will be useful, but we're going to flip this Show Carousel feature flag on. But I'll also show you the website that we have set up. So
I assume the website's just running on EC2 instance or something else.
It's actually running on. Oh wait, is this tab being shown now?
Yep.
It is. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, this website is being hosted on Amplify, and that's a service that lets you host front end and back end applications. And then Amplify is communicating with Lambda and DynamoDB. So not EC2, but Lambda.
Okay.
So here is the website. And as you can see here, there's just pictures of these homes. There are 8 homes, and you'll see why that's important soon. But there's also just like singular static photos of each home. So I'm going to show you when we introduce the carousel feature that you're going to be able to see multiple homes of multiple photos of each home.
Yeah, Chloe, real quick, how did you get a picture of my house? That's interesting.
Your house is nice.
I'm joking.
I know. Or that I don't know, but
hey, you don't,
that would be funny. I don't know anything. Okay, so now let's go back to AppConfig. And we are going to turn this Show Carousel feature flag on. So then you're going to save this version.
And at some point, you had to kind of substantiate AppConfig with the Amplify code, right? Or kind of link them together.
Yes. So it is basically the logic of this application has basically lines. Basically, it's communicating with AppConfig, and it's doing that via Lambda.
So, in that case, it might be using like some kind of JSON configuration from AppConfig within the application.
Yes, and what we have here though is this is kind of like our opinionated version of feature flags that we've created for our customers. But like if you were in the, I guess in the background, you would have like a configuration profile with the configuration data. And then on the Lambda side, your Lambda function is actually using an extension, which I'll talk about later, but it basically helps you with caching and polling. And it's definitely a best practice that we recommend if you're using Lambda. So cool. So let me now deploy these changes, and then I'll talk you through a little bit about like what each component of the deployment means. So I'll click start
Perfect.
deployment. So the first piece here is selecting an environment. So an environment is a namespace that you use for a logical deployment target. So that could be dev, beta, prod, North America, mobile users. You get the point. For this demo, I just have one called beta. And then the next piece here is the configuration, hosted configuration version. Version 17 has our carousel feature enabled. And this is just going to be good for version control purposes because you can go back and see what your previous configuration data looked like if you need to do that for auditing or for troubleshooting or anything. You have that ability. And then the next piece here is the deployment strategy. So I'll talk a little bit about gradual rollouts later in this conversation, I think, but basically just to introduce it, one best practice that we recommend is to release your features gradually so that you can actually measure the impact of the configuration change on your application. So I am not going to be practicing what I preach because I created an instant deployment strategy for this demo, which basically means that the feature will be rolled out at 100% immediately, which is not what you'd want to do in your production environment and not what we recommend, but
Sure.
alas.
Yeah, and Chloe, just to clarify, so in a production environment, we would release the feature gradually. Is that right? Like, so 10%?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, and you can kind of determine what percentage you want the increments to go by. There's also something called bake time where you can wait for any alarms to go off. So we have these safeguards in place that are really useful from just like making sure that your configuration changes are not harmful.
Awesome.
Cool. So now let's go back to our website here. Oh, wait, sorry. I'm messing up this screen share. Okay, can you see this?
We're seeing the cribs now.
Okay, yeah, back to the cribs, your home. We have our carousel showing. So now you can see little slideshows of each home. So that would be like our big feature release for the month or whatever. So the next, sorry, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, so that was a typical kind of like what you would think would be a regular release, just like you were saying. However, I just want to make sure I'm thinking about this right. The code was already there, and it was just a matter of basically flipping a switch. You did not re-upload code to Amplify. You did not re-upload or have to recompile anything. Maybe it was just basically changing a variable and enabling something. The code was already there, and now we see the new feature.
Yeah, I can even show you what the Lambda function. I mean, it's actually not super interesting to go through the lines of code, but it's basically saying like if flag on, then show
literally.
this. So
Okay.
yeah, it's literally like a line of code that is telling your application to not show this feature unless the feature flag is on. So yeah, you don't have to send your updates through an entire pipeline and then wait for the deployment time, which is pretty cool.
Sure. And Chloe, just so I remember, so right now with AppConfig, we support Secrets Manager. Does it also support Parameter Store? Can I pull out?
It does.
Perfect. Okay. So I could pull out the parameters from Parameter Store, store my secrets.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll show you. So I'll show you one more feature flag, and then I'll show you what it looks like to have a secret manager integration. So now I'll go back to AppConfig, And you can see that within, sorry.
Yep, we see the console now.
Great. So we also have this feature flag that's called pagination. So here, if we click on this feature flag, you can also see that we have something called attributes. And I mentioned this earlier, but when most people think of feature flags, they'll think of just like the on-off Boolean example. But we offer multi-dimensional flags. So you can do Booleans, but you can also have strings or numbers or arrays. So that's going to give your engineers a lot more power, and you can add basically like sub features and sub configurations to your feature flag. So here you can also see something called constraints that are in place, and you can set minimum and maximum values for the pagination number on your website. So let's say we want to change this number to 10. We'll save it and then save new version. And now I'll do the deployment process that I showed you earlier.
And the deployment process, does it vary on how many resources are being used for the website, or does it matter?
What do you mean?
Like based on how many resources, I guess the scale matters, right? Like, is it going to be faster for?
Oh, yeah. So when you're thinking about deployments, like it's basically like on the target end of what you have on your application. So you get to kind of control with your deployment strategy how gradual that would be or not. But in terms of like what does the deployment look like depending on your architecture, I would say like it's kind of up to you and how you configure it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So now I was just going to show you that there's 10 homes, not 8.
Yeah.
Cool. So this is
switch?
what I.
Okay. Yeah, we see that it deployed.
Oh, my bad. I keep doing that. I'm sorry. But yeah, you can see here that now we have 10 homes.
Gotcha.
Awesome. And I guess, Jeff, that last home is mine.
I was just about to say that. Thanks for adding new houses home. Yeah.
Well, cool. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you with feature flags. Do you guys have questions, or should I talk a little bit about or should I show you the secrets manager piece next?
Yeah, let's go into secrets manager. Let's see, talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah. So now I'll show you, I'm going to go back and I'm going to share this tab. We're going to go back to our configuration profiles and feature flags. And you can see that this one is called secret. So let's say that like you wanted to introduce some type of database or basically anything to your application that might have a secret, and that might be using secrets manager. You can see here now that if you click on this, you are basically referencing a source that's living in secrets manager. I'm just going to show you that quickly, but now we're being brought to the secrets manager console. And then if you were to go back to AppConfig, I'll just show you what it would look like to create a configuration profile. So you can see here that there's the feature flag option, and then there's the freeform configuration. If you selected the freeform configuration, you would see all of these different options as your configuration source provided. So
yeah, I was going to ask about other services that it talks to, and we see right here S3, systems manager, code pipeline, et cetera, et cetera.
And I can see their store right there.
Yeah, that was a good question. Spot on. Cool. So I think that's pretty much it for the demo that I wanted to show you.
No, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's. I liked how earlier you said, kind of helping developers think of what can be done in this fashion with feature flags, and it's just neat to see. Even though I'm not a developer, so some developers out there, if you're watching, don't roll your eyes at me, but it's just neat to see the evolution of developing, going from monolithic to now microservices, and now it's almost like the next thing beyond microservices. What little things can we go beyond microservices to turn on and off and to make changes? And AppConfig is here to help. So I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. And I also see it like from the perspective of like a product manager, like having the ability to test out your new features for your applications and just seeing how successful a customer might see it. Like you showed us the carousel, right? Like provisioning it and then confirming to see, are we attracting more visitors to the application, like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And even yesterday when we introduced this new integration, like we had everything pushed to production, but hiding behind a feature flag. So it's cool that like within it just felt very meta, like we were using feature flags. And that's kind of what our product is. So
Yeah.
it is really helpful and it makes things a lot safer. So I'd recommend if you haven't used them. But it's kind of like the featureization of your workload. I heard that phrase once and I liked it.
Yeah. So Chloe, before we wrap up, any last words? Where can people go for more information? How can they get started? What do you want to close with?
I think I'd close with maybe get to our documentation where it says get started. And from there you can, see the steps to creating your own application. You can create your configuration profile. You can just play around in the console. I believe there's going to be a link shared. I don't know, but maybe someone on my team can share it with the group. Oh, cool. There it is.
Yeah, sweet. Perfect. Well, Chloe, thanks so much. And I like talking to a bunch of these different guests like yourself to learn about something that I would probably have never really taken the time to look into. I guarantee you, if we wouldn't have met, I would probably never learned what feature flags are. And at least now I can talk to them. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Chloe, I'm looking forward to trying it out myself on my Signal website.
Please do. I would love that. Thank you guys for having me.
Cool. Chloe, thanks. Let's keep in touch, and thanks again.
Thank you, Chloe.